about the soul of their minds. Yeah, not a thing or two, about a thing or two, about a thing or two. Mansplaining is deciding you're gonna search for the truth. Mansplain me, baby. Mansplain. There can be no taking back, would be uncool.
Welcome to Mansplaining, a podcast about the interesting things you can discover if you just take the time to learn. My name's Mark. I'm your host for this week. And as always, I'm joined by Joe, an old friend from college. Together, we'll explore what's on our minds and hopefully figure out a thing or two about a thing or two. Joe, this week's topic is something as inevitable as death and taxes, which is at some point in everybody's life, you need to confront the question, when can or should or must I retire? And my own perspective on that is I have always hoped never to retire. I'm one of those people who kind of expected to die at his desk, but I'm also aware that I might not have the option, that might be dictated to me rather than a choice that I make. And it raises the question in my mind, why is it that a certain age is associated with retirement? In my mind, it's always been about 65, but it seems like in a parallel universe, it could be 50 or 80, or retirement could be nothing at all. So I'm curious about the historical conditions that went into the definition of 65-ish as being the age of retirement, and whether those conditions are still relevant today. So I'm looking forward to hearing what you learned.
Yeah, and thanks for a good question. This is certainly a topic that I've been thinking about generally for the last couple of years because I am in my early 60s now. But I have not inquired into the genesis of 65 as a retirement age, and it turns out to be a pretty interesting story. So I'm going to spend quite a bit of time in my presentation today going over that history because not only is it interesting, but I think it's relevant to your question about why 65. And indeed, 65 is kind of a magic number. Millions of Americans associate it with retirement. It's when we start collecting Social Security. It's when Medicare coverage begins. For over 90 years, 65 has been integral to how Americans think about the latter stages of their lives. And yet, despite 65's almost mystical resonance, 67 is currently the full retirement age for most Americans. I'll say more about that later, but as I mentioned a minute ago, I want to start with the history of old age benefits and how 65 came to be associated with them in the first place, before addressing the current debate about retirement age. The word retirement comes from the French retirer, which I just butchered in pronunciation, but it means to withdraw. It didn't become synonymous with no longer working until about 150 years ago. The social insurance programs that led to Social Security started in the late 19th century, but their roots go back much farther than that. In Western history, at least, the earliest cooperative system for economic security might have been the guilds formed by merchants and craftsmen during the Middle Ages. Laborers with a common trade or business formed mutual aid societies to regulate production and employment, but also to provide benefits to their members, like financial help in times of illness or injury, or to defray the family's expenses after a member died. From guilds emerged friendly societies in the 16th century in England, which evolved into fraternal organizations, the forerunners of modern labor unions. Some began providing life insurance to members. During the Industrial Revolution, they grew so dramatically that by the beginning of the 19th century, about 1 in 9 Englishmen belonged to one. Some fraternal organizations, like the Freemasons and the Elks, spread to America. Concurrent with the development of fraternal organizations in England was the advent of poor laws adopted to provide economic security to people in poverty. The The Social Security website cites the English Poor Law of 1601 as, quote, the first systematic codification of English ideas about the responsibility of the state to provide for the welfare of its citizens, end quote. Citizens were taxed to fund local community-based relief activities, with almshouses established to house those on relief. The law was generous and forward-thinking in acknowledging the government's responsibility to provide welfare to the poor, but it was also harsh in the way it viewed the poor as highly undesirable individuals. The Pilgrims took the structural and moral framework of poor laws with them to the New World. They discriminated between deserving and undeserving poor, and it was up to each town's elders to decide who was in each category and how or whether support would be provided. The moralizing continued into the 18th and 19th centuries in America. When local systems of poor relief became strained, states began to finance almshouses and poorhouses to, quote-unquote, contain the problem. To discourage dependency, the relief offered in such places was made as unpleasant as possible. Recipients might lose their personal property or their right to vote, and in some cases had to advertise their status by wearing a large P on their clothing.
For crying out loud.
Yes.
Like literally branded as poor.
Well, we knew about the Scarlet A, right, through Nathaniel Hawthorne, so I guess this isn't surprising. And I would like to extrapolate from this data, Mark, if I could just digress for a minute. I feel like I now understand why the Pittsburgh Pirates wear a P on their caps. It's because they never have money, they always suck. And before doing this research, I thought the P stood for Pittsburgh, but I stand corrected.
Well done, Joe, in evoking the scorn heaped upon the poor by heaping scorn within this podcast on the poor, downtrodden Pittsburgh Pirate players and fans.
It's a dismal franchise, so I think that was well-deserved, but I digress. The evolution from the social stigma of early American poorhouses to the modern retirement system took centuries. The Revolutionary War era pamphleteer Thomas Paine was one of the first to propose a scheme for retirement security recognizable today as a forerunner of modern social insurance. Paine's last great pamphlet, Agrarian Justice, published in 1795, called for the new nation to establish a publicly funded system in which anyone inheriting property would pay a 10% inheritance tax into a special fund from which one-time stipends of £15 would be paid to all citizens who turned 21 to kickstart their adult lives, and then upon turning 50, they'd get annual benefits of £10 to guard against poverty in old age. Paine's plan was never implemented, but the principle undergirding it, that social insurance was a right rather than charity, became highly influential. Besides Paine, there are three other historical precursors to the Social Security system we recognize today, two here in the USA and the third in Germany. The first precursor was created for the benefit of one exalted group, the families of soldiers who fought in the Civil War. After the Civil War, there were hundreds of thousands of disabled veterans and an equally large number of widows and orphans, and these folks could no longer fend for themselves. Though pensions have been paid to American soldiers and veterans throughout our country's history, the Civil War pension was an especially generous program. Widows and orphans received pensions equal to what their deceased soldier would have received if he had been disabled. By 1890, any disabled Civil War veteran qualified for benefits, even if his disability wasn't suffered in the war. In 1894, military pensions comprised 37% of the entire federal budget. By 1906, old age was made a sufficient qualification for benefits so that Civil War veterans and their survivors enjoyed an array of disability, survivor, and old age benefits similar to what later emerged with Social Security. And just in case you're wondering, former Confederate soldiers and their families did not receive Civil War pensions.
So to the victor, not only goes the spoils, but also goes the pension.
Yes, traitors don't get pensions. By the 1870s, some private companies have begun requiring that their workers retire at a fixed age. At the time, at least 250,000 men over the age of 60 were no longer working. Older men who lived in industrialized cities often had it tough, with no family resources on which to depend. If they were lucky, they might receive help from a charity or end up in old age homes. Facing pressure from reformers and labor unions to address the plight of their former workers, some employers in the railroad, mining, and manufacturing industries began adopting benefit programs that included old age pensions. So we're talking private pensions. By 1925, there were about 370 such pension plans in America, and most offered 1% of the employee's average salary for each year he was at the company. Not surprisingly, these pensions had the side effect of keeping employees loyal and obedient to their employers. But the companies offering pensions collectively employed just a tiny fraction of American workers. The third historical precursor for retirement takes us to Germany and Otto von Bismarck, who served as the first chancellor of the unified German Empire from 1871 to 1890. In broaching the idea to the German parliament in 1881, Bismarck said, quote, "Those who are disabled from work by age and invalidity have a well-grounded claim to care from the state." End quote. He spoke those words not only to win the allegiance of Germany's working class, but also to curtail the emigration of young Germans to America, as they were coming by the boatload at that time, and also to undermine the growing socialist and Marxist political opposition. Bismarck's program, finally established in 1889, was the modern world's first welfare state, offering a suite of programs that included old age insurance. Partially underwritten by the government, with the remainder funded equally by employers and workers, it was initially designed to provide a pension annuity for all German workers who reached the age of 70. That age was based not on analyses of when Germans stopped working, but on political and budgetary considerations. Bismarck knew the program wouldn't cost much because the average worker didn't live to the age of 70, and those who did usually died within a few years. The eligibility age was lowered to 65 in 1916 to provide relief to older citizens during the First World War. By the 1930s, the U.S. was the only industrial country without an old age retirement system. Does that sound familiar? Because same thing happened with healthcare.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah, but that changed with the passage of the Social Security Act in 1935, one of the cornerstones of FDR's New Deal agenda. FDR tasked the Committee on Economic Security with designing the system. The committee consisted of 5 cabinet-level officials who made a comprehensive study of economic security in America and around the world. Its report documented societal changes that made old age insurance necessary, things like industrialization, urbanization, and the switch from extended families to nuclear families. Though the committee's conclusions weren't based explicitly on the German precedent, they were based on the pragmatism underlying the German system and the other social insurance programs that were then widespread in Europe. Social Security would address the problem of economic security for the elderly by creating a system in which workers contributed to their own future retirement benefits by making regular tax payments into a joint fund. One of the toughest questions FDR's committee had to answer was the age of eligibility. The committee's researchers learned that pension programs for Civil War veterans used age 65 as a benchmark for determining eligibility. They also looked at retirement ages in the private pension plans in existence at that time, as well as public pension systems operating in 30 states. Most of the public systems had been implemented only since the start of the Great Depression a few years earlier, and most were poorly funded and under-enrolled. Half of all pension systems surveyed used age 65, and the other half used age 70. The Federal Railroad Retirement System, recently enacted by Congress in 1934, used age 65. Meanwhile, Louisiana's populist icon Huey Long was proposing not only a guaranteed annual income for American families, but also a pension for everyone over age 60. The popular elderly activist Francis Townsend also proposed a monthly pension for every citizen 60 and older. After consulting actuarial tables to determine which age produced a manageable system that would be self-sustaining with only modest levels of payroll taxation, and mindful of intense public pressure to lessen the economic hardships caused by the Great Depression, the committee ultimately recommended age 65. According to Dora Costa, chair of UCLA's economics department and author of An Economic History of Retirement, quote, below 65 would have been too expensive to set up. Above that would have been politically unpopular. Unemployment rates were high, so the political selling point of Social Security was to get the elderly out of the labor force, end quote. In a depressed economy with 25% unemployment, 65 was seen by the committee as a way to transition older workers out of the workforce in favor of younger people. This was considered a win-win. Older workers would receive financial security while younger workers would step into their jobs. As the historian Carol Haber put it, quote, mandatory retirement thus became a multifaceted solution. It promised work to the young, seniority to the unions, efficiency to the engineer, stability and discipline to the employer, end quote. I had not considered the fact that getting older workers out of the workforce would have been a motivating factor. Was that surprising for you to hear as well, Mark?
Yeah, totally. I hadn't considered that, but in retrospect, it kind of makes sense that if you're struggling with unemployment
yes,
and the political consequences of unemployment, one of the things that you're going to want to do is, in a reverse way, create jobs by giving older Americans the ability to not be employed anymore, and therefore opening those jobs for other people to take. So yeah, it makes sense, but I hadn't thought about it before.
Right, ditto. 65 seemed a reasonable number for another reason that Bismarck would have appreciated. It was higher than the life expectancy of most Americans. Nearly a half century after Bismarck launched the German system, life expectancies were still only about 60 years for American men, who constituted the vast majority of the workforce, and 64 for women. This meant that Social Security, at least at its outset, was unlikely to run out of money because most Americans would be paying more into the program than they would live to receive. In addition, there were many more contributors than recipients. With only 7% of the population aged 65 years or older at that time, there were 10 workers aged 15 to 64 years for each person 65 and above. Needless to say, a lot has changed in the 90-plus years since Social Security started. Most of the medicines and public health programs that keep us alive longer, from germ theory to vaccines to chemotherapy to MRIs to better sanitation, were either invented, popularized, or implemented in the decades just before and just after 65 became the retirement age.
It's interesting to think that the original concept was just sort of a gamble by the state that you're probably going to be dead before you get these benefits that we're promising you. And that we got a revenge on those governments by way of medicine and healthier living and washing our hands so that we don't get cholera all the time.
Yes.
Also, one of the determining factors in calculating this age was balancing political unpopularity of higher ages against the ruinous expense of lower ages and finding that balance point.
Yes.
So as human life expectancy increased, the unpopularity of raising the retirement age did not get any less. There apparently has been no point when we could have the conversation of, oh, you're more likely to live to 75, so we're going to push retirement up to 70. We hold on to that number because we feel entitled to it, and that creates some of the funding challenges that we're facing.
Yes, exactly. And I am going to talk quite a bit about the political trade-offs later in this presentation, but I want to detour right now to talk about life expectancy, because that's a term that's come up a couple times now. I want to make sure people understand what this is and how it factors in. The term life expectancy refers to the expected average number of years of life remaining at a given age. Those last four words, at a given age, are important because there are two measures of life expectancy that sometimes get confused. In 2023, the last full year for which we have federal data, life expectancy at birth was 78.4 years for the total U.S. population. For males, it was 75.8. For females, 81.1. Since the advent of Social Security, life expectancy at birth has increased by 16 years. But even more relevant to our conversation, life expectancy at age 65 in the U.S. in 2023 was 19.5 years. For males, it was 18.2. For females, 20.7. In other words, retirement age is now well under Social Security recipients' life expectancies. Americans who make it to age 65 are outliving the traditional retirement age by nearly 2 decades. Whereas only 7% of the population was 65 or older in 1935, 17% is today. In fact, we're currently experiencing the largest surge of retirees in America's history, with an estimated 11,200 people turning 65 every day in the years 2024 to 2027. Instead of a 10-to-1 ratio between younger workers and retirees, the ratio is now 4-to-1, and it's expected to go down to 3-to-1 by 2033. By the 2070s, we'll be looking at a quarter of the U.S. population being 65 or older and a 2-to-1 ratio.
Yeah, pretty unforgiving math there, isn't it?
Yes, it is unforgiving, and the country had to do something about it, and now I'm going to start talking about what we're doing. With demographers already sounding the alarm about Americans getting older and living longer, in 1983, Congress passed a law to gradually raise the retirement age, and that's why the so-called full retirement age, or FRA, is now 67 for people like us who were born after 1960. That's the age at which you're entitled to 100% of your Social Security retirement benefit. You can claim Social Security benefits as early as age 62, but if you claim them before 67, your monthly payment is permanently reduced. It's currently a 70% benefit if you claim at 62. If you have the financial wherewithal to postpone claiming benefits, you receive what's called delayed retirement credits for each month you delay starting your benefits beyond the full retirement age up to age 70, at which time your monthly payments would be about 24% higher than if you started at age 67. The Social Security Administration's website posts a retirement age calculator so people know what percentage of their Social Security benefits they'll get at different ages. For anyone who's interested, I'll post it to our Facebook page as the first item in my list of sources for this episode.
So is that incentive system to claim benefits later in life, is that sort of a grim gamble on the part of the government that some of us would die between 67 and 70, and so they won't actually have to pay out on those increased benefits? Or is it not as cold-blooded as I'm imagining it to be?
I think it's not as cold-blooded, and here's why. In my research, I wasn't planning to talk about this, but since you brought it up, I read something really interesting about how Social Security benefits are actuarially equal, meaning if you retire at 62 and live till the dictionary definition of mortality, whatever man or woman expires, and if you take your retirement benefit at 70 and live to that exact day when you're supposed to die, those benefits are absolutely equal.
It works out to the same.
Yes. So they're scrupulously trying to be even-handed here.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Despite already raising the full retirement age, which I would like to call FRA from this point forward, the Social Security Board of Trustees projects that the program will be insolvent by 2035. With incoming tax revenue able to pay only 79% of scheduled benefits. Most people who pay close attention to this subject expect further tweaks to the system's financing in the coming years, but there's a robust debate about what tweak makes the most sense. The trust fund's rate of return on investment is one factor affecting its solvency. But that ebbs and flows with the market and is thought to be outside our control. Though I do wonder what would happen if we put all of Social Security revenue into the Trump coin cryptocurrency.
From what I understand, cryptocurrency only goes up, up, up. And if there's one thing you can trust, it's the name of Trump. So I feel very confident in that plan. Very confident that all the money would be stolen and that we would never see it again.
Yes. Attention mansplaining listeners. If you want to engage with Mark and me, you have some options. One is to go to our Facebook page, Mansplaining the Podcast, where you can leave a comment or question, check our sources, suggest topics for future episodes, or just like us. Because who doesn't want to be liked? You can also reach us through whatever app you use to listen to this podcast by giving us a 5-star rating or writing a review of your favorite episode. Or you can call and leave us a message on our dedicated voicemail box, which is 206-486-4074. And did you know that you can now listen to full episodes of Mansplaining on YouTube and check out our podcast music on Spotify? Yep, it's true. Just type Mansplaining Podcast into the search bar on either platform and you'll find us. It's lonely in podcast land, and we welcome and appreciate any feedback you might want to share. Act now and we'll throw in a set of Ginsu knives. Not really. So what Congress can control are these 3 variables: the level of retirement benefits, the level of payroll tax revenues, and the retirement age. Reducing benefits, besides being wildly unpopular politically, would also increase the poverty rate among senior citizens, many of whom live hand to mouth and rely on their Social Security benefits being stable. Raising the payroll tax or maximum taxable earnings is unpopular with business owners and the self-employed, key constituencies for any politician looking to survive the next election. Though I will get back to that option at the end. For now, at least, that leaves raising the FRA again, which is also unpopular, but not to the extent of the other 2. To get the system back to its original balance of 10 younger workers for every retiree, we'd need to raise FRA by 8 years, from 67 to 75. A retirement age of 75 would still be lower than current life expectancy at birth and would result in retirees living about the same number of years after retiring as when Social Security was established. So what do you think, Mark? We retire at 75?
Well, I kicked off this podcast saying that I hope to never retire, so it's kind of an academic enterprise for me.
Yes.
But yeah, I could. There are people I know who would just be
apoplectic,
blue in the face with rage at the prospect of having to work that long. And I understand France is going through that now, that Macron, their president, has attempted to raise the retirement age there to great hue and cry in opposition.
Yes, and I'm going to mention that too. Yeah. Okay, so you might be wondering, apropos to your last point, how does FRA in the United States compare to other countries? The answer is we're at the high end of the bell curve. Though there are some outliers like Saudi Arabia, whose FRA is 47, believe it or not.
Wow.
Full retirement age in most countries today is in the upper 50s to mid-60s. There were widespread protests in France in 2010, you just mentioned, when the government tried to increase the retirement age from 60 to 62. And the French are still on the warpath about this. 67 is the highest age I saw in my research, and the U.S. shares that distinction with Greece, Iceland, Israel, Italy, the Netherlands, and Norway. The UK's retirement age, currently 66, increases to 67 in 2028 and then to 68 by 2044. But even that might not be enough to secure its system, as a British think tank is warning that the state pension age will have to increase to 71 by 2050 to remain solvent. The expert consensus is that the likeliest move for keeping Social Security solvent into our own golden years and beyond is to increase the FRA. It reduces the need for benefit cuts and payroll tax increases, while also providing ample notice to workers as they make retirement saving decisions. Due to increased life expectancy, we currently spend about 27% of our lives collecting Social Security benefits. And that percentage won't change much if the FRA gradually increases. While doing nothing is tantamount to an unsustainable benefit increase, gradually increasing the FRA would reduce Social Security's projected long-range shortfall by about 18%. There's also some academic research showing that countries whose FRA is 60, so lower than ours, have higher unemployment rates for older workers, whereas those with higher retirement ages have lower unemployment among such workers. The explanation given is that employers don't want to hire older workers because there's an expectation that they'll soon retire. Research like this further increases the likelihood of raising the full retirement age. 70 might soon be the new 67.
Yeah. Having been recently on the job hunt, going through interview after interview after interview, I was not thinking that I was not getting hired because they thought I would come in and then immediately retire. I was thinking it was more just associations of older people with discomfort with technology, which I don't say to negate your point, but just that it's probably more complicated than simple expectations of how long that employee would be on the job. We've got a lot of associations with age that would factor into employment, particularly if we're talking about people who are, pushing 70 as opposed to just pushing 60 or 65.
Yeah. Given our recent job issues, I think maybe age discrimination might be a topic worthy of a future mansplaining discussion.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But yeah, that stat surprised me too, because my understanding was people flit from job to job to job to job. And if you're at a job these days for more than 2 or 3 years, you're a weirdo. So why would they then not want to hire an older worker for fear that they'd retire soon? That should be a selling point,
Right. When I was working in employer brand about 5-6 years ago, the average tenure in a job was 2.5 years. So you're correct about that. My own perception of the answer to your question just now is that when they hire an employee who's, say, 30 years old, the thinking is maybe this person's going to be the CEO someday. Like there's this upper end. It's like getting a lottery ticket and thinking it might be a big winner.
Right.
Whereas the expectation of further achievement and advancement with an older worker is lower, which is quite unfair. But I think that's the feeling, that maybe if you hire the young employee, there's going to be a huge payoff in rare cases that is simply not accessible if you're hiring someone who's around 60 years old.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I guess I understand that way of thinking, but the easy rebuttal is that 60-year-old is coming in at a much higher level of achievement and knowledge. So, they're already rivaling the CEO's skill set, at least in my mind.
Yeah.
Okay, so I said 70 might soon be the new 67. But then again, simply increasing the retirement age without systemic reform would perpetuate a vicious inequality that's already baked into the system. That's because increases in life expectancy aren't shared evenly across income distribution. In fact, the life expectancy gap between upper and lower income individuals has only grown over time. For example, for men born in 1960, those in the top fifth of income had a life expectancy at age 50 that was 12.7 years longer than those in the bottom fifth. I mean, that's significant. And that pattern held for women, too. In other words, increasing the retirement age disproportionately limits the total lifetime benefits for lower income workers because of their shorter life expectancies.
Yeah.
Many have argued that instead of arbitrary age thresholds, we should instead consider a person's financial need and their energy, purpose, and contributions to society. A kinder, gentler Social Security system wouldn't be based on a one-size-fits-all number derived nearly a century ago. It'd be flexible, individualized, and supportive. A few reforms have been suggested. One is to establish a basic minimum benefit for low-income beneficiaries to help offset the financial penalty of higher retirement age on people with shorter life expectancies, or who made less money in their careers due to the nature of their work, or who can't wait until they reach FRA to claim their benefits. Under such a plan, the minimum benefit would be scaled so those earning the lowest Social Security benefits would receive the largest supplemental payments. To preserve the incentive for lower earners to keep working, total benefits would continue to increase with additional earnings. A second idea is to make the benefit formula more progressive than it already is, to help compensate for the regressive impact of increases to the FRA. There have also been legislative initiatives like the Secure Act 2.0, passed in 2022, that allow retirement benefits to be extended to long-term part-time employees. When non-retired Americans are asked when they plan to retire, most say 65 or 67. But according to a recent Gallup poll, the average age that people actually retire is 61. Of course, that's not always by choice. Some people, like yours truly, get laid off in their early 60s and have trouble finding another job, while others might leave the workforce to care for an ailing parent or spouse. But I think that lower number tells us something important about what Americans really want. And to that point, Annie Lowrey, writing in The Atlantic, makes a compelling argument for lowering the retirement age instead of raising it. She acknowledges the demographic challenge facing rich countries like the US, France, and Japan, where low birth rates, which we discussed in episode 93 of this podcast, mean there will be fewer workers per retiree, and raising the retirement age seems sober and prudent on its face. But she pushes back that, quote, In reality, raising the retirement age is the fetishistic obsession of a tiny sliver of beltway wonks, people wholly out of step with what average Americans want and need." End quote. What would help the U.S. avoid the demographic cliff, she writes, are things like welcoming millions more immigrants, or establishing a paid leave policy and child allowance to assist families that want more kids. To fix Social Security's solvency, she advocates raising the wage cap on payroll taxes from its current level, which is $160,200. She thinks we should raise that to $300,000 or even higher, and points to research that change alone would secure Social Security's financing for decades. She also cites the class-based inequality in outcomes for retirees that I mentioned earlier. Quote, "The rich get to retire and have fun. The poor have to work until their body starts to give out." End quote. The politicians who argue for raising the retirement age work in fulfilling white-collar jobs, while at least 1/3 of the folks on the other end of the spectrum, the people who do back-breaking manual labor or toil in mind-numbing service jobs, are willing to, quote, "trade a lower monthly benefit for the ability to stop changing tires or working a cash register for $11 an hour at age 62, end quote. Echoing that Gallup poll I mentioned, Lowry thinks the actions of millions of Americans speak louder than the words of a few hundred politicians. She argues that, given all the policy options available for funding the system without raising the retirement age, there's no good reason not to give workers what they want in the form of full retirement benefits at age 62.
It occurs to me that there's another option that it seems that nobody's really considering, which is partial retirement. We're sold this idea of retirement as a chance to, walk hand in hand with our loved ones as the sun sets and with a golden retriever frolicking beside us. But for a lot of people, retirement means a loss of sense of purpose, loss of structure in their life, loss of the social network that their employment provided. It's an experience as a loss, and if I'm not mistaken, it's often associated with mental decline because you're no longer challenged, you're no longer extended, you're no longer learning new things. And so I've heard it proposed that instead of retiring, people should just go down to part-time. Like you should half retire so that you are no longer putting in the grueling hours that you were before, but you're still bringing in some money. You're still connecting with other people through your work. And it feels like that would also solve many problems because the people working part-time would be making more money than they receive in benefits in the first place. And so they're unlikely to feel the loss of retirement benefits. And also it would be opening up space within the workforce because those hours that you're no longer working would need to be worked by someone.
Right.
Like it seems to me like this is a third way, and yet we're sort of in this binary of either pushing out retirement or pulling in retirement, but in either one of those formulations, it's all retirement or no retirement at all. How does that strike you?
Yeah, it's an interesting idea. It strikes me, you mentioned something right at the end about how one of the subtexts of this system is to push older workers out. So maybe that's an unspoken thing, but it's a reality of the system going back to Bismarck's Germany. And so continuing to have a toehold in work when you're older kind of undermines that concept. That's the first thought that came to mind. But then the second thing is, it seems to me it would be enormously complicated to run Social Security in a world where many millions of people are continuing to work part-time, right? Like eligibility age is kind of almost not a relevant concept anymore. Like, when do you take Social Security? You're supposed to take it when you stop working. Mm-hmm. If you're only half working, do you get half Social Security? Like it seems complicated.
Well, couldn't they run that the way they currently do with you get a certain benefit amount at 67 or different benefit if you don't claim it until 70 because it's all amortized against an expected life expectancy.
Yes.
So if you're working part-time until 75, then that would just compress the expected payout period and your monthly benefit would be higher. Like that seems like it would just be an extension of the current system.
Yeah, okay, maybe that works. It's a complicated problem for the bureaucrats and actuaries to work out, but
Right.
It's an interesting idea. I want to leave us with one last wrinkle here that I have not mentioned before, and I want to end with one last number in this number-heavy presentation, and it's about confidence in the future. Among those not yet eligible for Social Security, nearly 70% are not confident that they'll receive their earned benefits at retirement.
Yeah, count me in that number too.
Yeah, okay.
For most of my adult life, I've expected Social Security to be a relic of the past by the time I hit the claiming age.
Interesting. I'm much more Pollyanna in this respect because I feel like we'd have another civil war on our hands if people worked all those years and didn't get Social Security. We can agree to disagree on that one. But to me, that statistics, 70% non-confidence, indicates that number that you and I and millions of others have been carrying around in our heads for most of our working lives, as you put it in your question, that magic number of 65 has lost a lot of its luster for the younger workers who come after us. If Social Security turns out to be what IT folks call brickware, a system that's degraded to the point of no longer being functional, then, to borrow another phrase, 65 years and a token will get you on the subway.
Yeah, and imagine the outrage, considering how outraged people are at the prospect of raising the retirement age by 2 years. Imagine the outrage when it's going to be, sorry, you get nothing. You worked for 50 years, paying into the system with every single paycheck. And now that it's your time to get a payout, sorry, all the money's gone.
Yes, and that's precisely why I think it's not likely to happen. I mean, the pitchforks would be out. Talk about, we think we're living in a throw the bums era of politics now. Can you imagine what would happen if Social Security turned up empty? They're going to fix it somehow. The argument's going to be how to fix it.
I think for me, the attitude has been sort of hope for the best, plan for the worst in a way. That if in my mind, Social Security will be gone by the time I finally retire, then getting a payout will be a pleasant surprise, instead of fully expecting a full payout and then possibly being deeply disappointed by that. So maybe I'm just preparing myself emotionally.
Yeah. I mean, I'm looking at your original question to me, are the factors that contributed to that definition of retirement age still meaningful and relevant today? I think my presentation has led us to conclude that they're kind of not relevant today, because of life expectancy. And I think the debate that's going to rage is how to keep the system solvent.
Yeah.
And you raise that interesting point. Maybe there will be some semi-retirement, part-time work will become the norm for a lot of seniors who can't afford to just retire. I could see that happening. Yeah,
particularly if you think if Bismarck were around today and doing the same calculations, the retirement age he came up with might have been 85 instead of 65.
Yes.
Because that's how the math works out. And so imagine today if you're going through the workforce thinking, I get retirement when I hit 85, it really changes how you perceive it.
Yes. And, that makes me think, I just got this thought while you were saying that Social Security was originally designed to be this thing that lasted a couple months to a few years, just to give you a little bit of financial security so you did not die destitute, right? And then life expectancy in modern medicine got way out in front of this program, and people started living 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years or more past their retirement age. And retirement became this wonderful time of life when you could travel and you're still healthy. Your health span was much longer, and it's completely out of sync with the original system, you know?
Right.
And so you would really have to make the retirement age 80 or higher to restore Social Security to its original mission. But I don't think we're going to do that, because all of us, you, me, and all our millions of fellow citizens, are expecting to have a dignified, fun, relaxing retirement. And you just can't go back to that original method, you know?
Yeah, it poses a fascinating scenario. If Congress and the White House, some Congress and White House of the future, were confronted with a choice of three things: either cancel Social Security, number two, lower the defense budget, or number three, tax rich people. Finally tax rich people in this country. Of those three choices, which have been politically completely unpalatable for the last 50 years, which of them would they most likely choose?
I think it would be some combination of 2 and 3. Lowering defense spending and, you know, the things that get funded to the max every year, which is mostly defense, and higher income tax rates, especially for rich people. So it's a progressive tax.
Yeah.
That will be the solution.
The pessimist in me says that the solution is more likely to be some BS privatization scheme, like outsourcing Social Security to some corporation, or to say it should be the responsibility of your church.
Yeah.
Like do a faith-based retirement plan just to get the government out from under it, and then allow those things to fail privately rather than the government failing publicly.
Yeah. Well, you're old enough to remember George W. Bush's re-election campaign, where he basically ran ads promising that no gay people will be allowed to get married, and that's what got him reelected. And then the minute he got back into office, his plan was to privatize Social Security. And that began the inevitable backlash that ended with him having the lowest approval ratings of any modern president. So we're 20 years later now. I think the public pulse would still do what they did to George W. Bush, and would throw out any politician, ride him out of town on a rail if they tried to privatize. But it does raise an intriguing question, Mark. People change. Values change. Maybe the younger generation, perhaps precisely because they're so suspicious of Social Security being there for them, maybe they will adopt a mindset that's profoundly different than all of us aging boomers and Gen X, and they will decide we can live without Social Security. There's going to be something, we're going to figure out another way. That could happen.
Yeah. Maybe Elon Musk will be right, and the AI will usher in a golden age where no one needs to work, and we have all our needs supplied by a subservient race of robots that will toil in the trenches for 10 or 20 years and then rise up against us in a bloody rebellion.
Yes, and for anyone who's intrigued by what Mark just said, please look at our mansplaining episode list, because we've done a bunch of episodes on those very topics, and they're worth listening to.
Yeah.
So did I answer your question? I think I took me a long time to get there, but I feel like I did my best here.
You did. You provided a lot of historical and political context for the number 65. So thank you for that.
Yeah. All right. Well, I've got a question for you for next time, as per our age-old procedure. Okay, so about a year ago, Mark, I asked you a question about whether lotteries were justifiable, especially given how the people who participate in them are disproportionately the least able to afford it. And that's episode 106 for anyone who wants to take a listen. Today, I want to ask you about gambling generally. I was initially going to focus my question on the legalization of sports gambling and all the emerging point shaving and other scandals that have come from it. But then I read an article about the explosive growth of prediction markets that made me rethink my question. people are now betting huge amounts of money on things like which turkey President Trump will pardon on Thanksgiving, or whether all 12 singles from Taylor Swift's new album would make the charts. It seems as though people are now betting on everything.
Yeah.
This strikes me as a terrible state of affairs.
Mm-hmm.
And so my question's for you. Am I wrong about that? What are the implications for society when gambling becomes ubiquitous?
Okay. Yeah. There's a lot to get into on that. I believe the term for like very specific bets like that is prop betting.
Yes.
It's a feature definitely within the sports world where on Sunday, when my beloved Seattle Seahawks play in the Super Bowl, you will be able to bet on the color of Gatorade that is poured over the winning coach at the end of the game.
Yes. So imagine some people's life savings are going to be won or lost on a ridiculous bet like that.
Right. You know, every now and then when there's a football game or a basketball game on and I hear just an ungodly shriek come from one of the apartments around here, I imagine that someone just lost a prop bet.
Yes.
Like that he had bet that a player whose name is 4 letters or less will score a touchdown in the game, and that guy was tackled at the 1-yard line or some
Right.
bizarre thing like that.
Right.
But yeah, I've given some thought to this. I also am concerned about the increasingly pervasive influence of gambling just seeping into every aspect of our lives.
Yes.
And I'll go down that rabbit hole and see what I can figure out.
Okay, great.
So we'll be dealing with betting on the next episode of Mansplaining. And listeners, you may be tempted to bet on whether or not that will be a good episode, but do not, because I assure you it is going to be a good episode.
But you can take the prop bet that Joe will curse sometime during the next episode. I'll give you
Yes.
an insider tip on that.
What's the over-under on sarcastic references to the Trump White House?
Yes.
So I'll get busy digging into that messy pile. And in the meantime, our listeners can contemplate the age at which they look forward to retiring and all the time they'll have post-retirement to listen to back episodes of Mansplaining. Until then, this is Mark, and that was Joe, and we'll talk to you soon.
Talk to you next time.
At 18, I was riding high, sucking down cosmopolitans with aggravated intent. Now at 65, I am laid low, swallowing tears from thoughts of youth misspent. My crow's feet are kicking, and the clock is surely ticking. It's about time I retired. My days in the sun, my nights having fun are so done, 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 done. At 25 I was the cat's meow, living a life of sumptuous magnificence. Now at 65 I eat dog chow, surrounded by unctuous indifference. Alone in my hovel, I dread the gravedigger's shovel. It's about time I retired. My cycle has spun, my load weighs a ton. I'm so done, 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 done. The 13-gallon bags under my eyes, the cellulite on my thighs are signs of my imminent collapse. I forgot what I wanted to sing, relegated to the second string. Why wait for more years to elapse? At 40 I glimpse the writing on the wall that said all this wouldn't last. Now at 65 I hear the grim No longer shall I be enthralled to the hot dame in a fancy shawl who claimed that she was Lauren Bacall. It's about time I retire, the end has begun. I've loaded my gun 'cause I'm done, done, done.
Mansplaining is brought to you by Joe and Mark and nobody else. Music composed and performed by the Mansplaining House Band. Thank you for spending your time with us, and we'll see you next time.